Hi, this is Elizabeth Lim from Sydney. For those of you who are new to the clarinet, today I'd love to share with you some characteristics of this wonderful instrument and also some pointers on developing superior habits. I've been a concert clarinetist and professional music educator for over 30 years now, and I firmly believe that if you have a good basic setup and an excellent method for learning, you can make progress quite rapidly and also sound good. So why learn clarinet, may you ask? Well, first of all, it's very nicely portable. It's amongst the lesser expensive of beginner woodwind instruments, and it's quite versatile in the respect it allows for development into more advanced play styles. It's also considered the basic instrument of the woodwind family. Many teachers use the clarinet as the beginning instrument for students who transfer to another woodwind instrument, and this transfer is more easily accomplished due to their experience on the clarinet. The greatest experience ought to be on the clarinet for a teacher seeking to familiarise themselves with woodwinds, as the basics learnt on it can be successfully applied to any other woodwind instrument. It has a very large dynamic range, and it also has a very large note range. The French composer Berlioz alluded to the clarinet in his treatise on instrumentation by saying that the ability of the instrument is absolutely priceless in its nuance. So the clarinet can go from extremely soft to loud, which is not something that all other blowing instruments can accomplish. There are three basic registers on the clarinet. There's the beautiful Chalumeau register, the lower register. The Clarinet register is the mid-range register, and then the Altissimo register. So the clarinet really has a wide range of tone colours and possibilities. Moving on to assembling the instrument, first of all we have the upper joint, and this is the lower joint. So something important to bear in mind is when you're putting your instrument together to press these rings that are on the upper joint. See how there's this lever that raises? This is the connecting part to another lever on the lower joint. Now what we want to do is press the upper rings but not the lower rings, because otherwise the connecting parts there, those two levers, will crash together, and it's a very common fault in putting instruments together which can result in bending the keys and the lever. So we want to put it together in a twisting motion, not a pushing one. And this is more easily accomplished if the corks are greased well. And you often find cork grease that's in a lipstick form, sort of winds up, and that prevents the lubrication in it, prevents you from struggling putting it together, which can result in over grasping the keys and bending the keys, which we really want to avoid. This is the bell, again a twisting motion. And the barrel. There's an opening, that's a large one, and a smaller one. We want the larger opening to go on the top. Now let's get to the mouthpiece. Should line up with the flat bit, which is called the lay, lining up with the back key. This is called a register key. So this should line up the flat bit with the register key. And then this is called a ligature. Many very different varieties of ligature too are on the market. This one's that I have here is designed to go with a single screw on the flat part, but a common one is with two screws. And you can either put them on this side of the clarinet, the screws, or on the other side, depending on the make and model. Now, with your reed, And I'll show you what a reed looks like. It's made from cane, and it actually comes from a plant called Arundodonyx. And cane is basically grown in areas where good wine is grown, curiously. And the south of France in the Var region is a common area. Also, we have reeds from South Australia, also from different parts of the world, like in South America. Anyway, there are different brands, but I think a good beginner's strength would be strength number 2 in maybe Van Doren brand. Know that there's a different comparison between brands. For example, Rico 2.5 is closer to 2 in Van Doren. So that's a good starting point. We always wet the reed all over because this is what's going to make the instrument sound and vibrate. So we want to wet it all over. And a good idea, rather than putting your reed on first, then the ligature, is to put the ligature on loosely and push it up, and then slide your reed in afterwards. This avoids clipping the top of your reed and breaking it. So a good starting point for your reed is to have a thin black line of mouthpiece going over the top of the reed. We don't want the reed necessarily to be higher than the mouthpiece. And to put it on as symmetrically as possible, to check that the bottom is in the center there, and then it's not crooked at all, because that will really affect the kind of tonal production. Let's talk about making our first sound. We would like to put our teeth on the top of the instrument, on the mouthpiece. And the place where you put your teeth varies, but a good idea is to look at your reed and your mouthpiece, and you can see that there's a gap between the mouthpiece and the reed. It sort of separates, and there's a point at which the reed is flush with the mouthpiece and it joins. That's probably a good place if you move your finger around and put your teeth lined up there. So top teeth on the mouthpiece, and then we want a thin bit of bottom lip, just enough that's covering your bottom teeth, and we want to stretch everything downwards. So, and I'll show you in profile. We want a concave sort of look with our chin. So there's a hollow, not convex. This would be not good. So if you have that stewed prune look, is what I refer it to as, that's got dimples in it, not good. We want to think stretching everything down. And then we close the sides of our mouths like in an O shape, like a rubber band. And let's try no fingers. So left hand's on the top, right hand's on the bottom, and we put our thumb underneath this thumb rest. And that's our first note, and it's called open G because it doesn't involve any fingers on holes or keys. Next, let's talk about producing this tone. Have you seen one of those heads that go on hoses, and you can adjust the dial and you can have sort of a mist, which is like, or you can have a very strong, thin stream of water. That's something you can think about with your airflow. So we don't want the misty spray, we want the very focused, fast water. So let's try again. So we're on the note G again, no fingers, and we're thinking of that water, thin stream of very fast focused air. Now, some common faults, if you're not getting a sound, it often is because you're biting too hard. So think about dropping your jaw and loosening it, but still with a fast air stream. And sometimes no sound comes out and you get this effect. That's because you're clamping down on the reed and the mouthpiece, probably too much. So same thing, try and relax the embouchure, but still thinking of fast air speed, and that should help. Some other faults with playing, it's not holding their instrument up properly or resting it on their knee, often on their right knee. Not a good idea. We want to look as symmetrical as possible, and your clarinet should be about 30 to 40 degrees from your body. If you have your clarinet too close or too high, this is when you have problems varying between a muffled tone that's out of tune, usually flat when it's close, or too high, you might end up in a squeak. Now, squeaks are a common thing with clarinets to start off with. It can be the reed's not on symmetrically or it's broken. So broken reeds we can basically set aside because it's too problematic to deal with. Just get out a new reed where possible. But more often than not, it's because your fingers aren't covering the holes properly, or you're biting. Or another reason is you have too much clarinet in your mouth. So a good thing to remember when playing your instrument for placement of your teeth is you can try with not enough clarinet in your mouth. That's not a very powerful sound. A little bit more. Already sounding better because I've put more in my mouth. And now even more. Better still. Then I've gone too far. So if you have too much clarinet in your mouth, it usually results in a squeak. But in actual fact, we want maximum vibration of the reed. So the more length of reed that's vibrating and is in your mouth, the better your tonal quality is usually. So basically, we want to put as much mouthpiece in our mouth as we can before that squeak point. Now let's talk a little bit about tuning. The clarinet's a little bit unusual in the respect that it overblows on the 12th rather than an octave. I'll explain more about that in a minute. But with all woodwind instruments, the pitch is determined by the distance between the first open hole and the mouthpiece. For example, on clarinet, the notes C to B flat involve just adding one finger, and it's only that distance away. But the pitch isn't determined by the distance between the C and the B flat fingering, or this hole and this hole here, which I've closed. It's actually determined by the distance between the notes involved and its ratio to the mouthpiece. So that's getting a little bit technical, but it's something that you should bear in mind when tuning your instrument. So if we're too sharp, meaning we sound too high, we want to pull out our barrel just a little bit to start off with. We want to make our instrument bigger. Bigger instruments sound lower. And what I'm getting at is because of this ratio of distance between the first open hole and the mouthpiece, on the clarinet we really need to elongate our instrument equally or evenly. So after trying by pulling out the barrel a little bit to see if you're more in tune, if you are sharp and too high, the next point would be pulling out the bell and then maybe even the middle joint. We want to make it even all over. And this is talking about getting in tune with other instruments or even with one other instrument. Anyway, I'm going to push it all back in again. This is home position. Now with your fingers, some other common problems with clarinetists are they're taking their fingers away too far and flat fingers. We want to keep our fingers in home position, which is as close as possible to the holes and keys. So either you're pressing the keys and the holes, or you're a micromillimeter away from them. And we want to be in a relaxed curved position. So this is our right hand thumb under the thumb rest. A common problem is that clarinetists or beginner students try in their effort to hold on to the instrument, they put the thumb rest too far in the crook of their thumb. We want to be closer to the thumbnail with our right hand. So we have maximum length with our fingers to be in a curved, slightly curved position. So whatever your hand would look like whenever it's just hanging down loosely, we don't want to deviate or contort our hand too much away from that. And the reason why we want a curved sort of finger position is as soon as you have straight fingers, you're creating tension in the palms of your hands, and it's very hard to play with facility. So we basically want to move our fingers in one motion emanating from this knuckle here. So getting back to tuning, the clarinet also has some peculiarities if you want. The lower in the register you play, the tendency is to go sharper, and the higher in the range you play, it tends to go flat. And this is interesting to note is that the flute is the exact opposite. The higher the flute goes, the sharper they generally become. So down the bottom, they'll go flatter. And the other thing with clarinet, the softer you play, the sharper or higher you tend to play, and the louder you play, you end up going flat. So you have to compensate with embouchure. And embouchure is the French word for the way that you form your mouth. And it comes from the French word bouche, which does mean mouth. You will learn more through being flexible with your embouchure, and also some fingering. And woodwind instruments tend to be flatter when they're cold before you start blowing warm air into them, which is actually the opposite with piano. So we've got all these variables to work around. Getting back to the reason why the clarinet overblows an interval of a 12th is because all notes above B flat, which is the middle line, they're all products of partial vibrations of the air column or overtones of the pitches below. Now, all other wind instruments actually overblow on an octave. Well, your average clarinetist needs to know a lot of fingerings. For example, on saxophone or other wind instruments, you might be using 3 fingers and your thumb, and you're getting low G, and then suddenly you put on the back key and you get an octave higher, high G. This is not the case on clarinet. So we have to learn, this is the fingering for C, but when we add the back key, it becomes high G, which is 12 notes higher. Now, if you think about it, the back key on wind instruments, it's generally called the octave key. For us, it's called the register key. Because of the acoustical properties of the clarinet, the octave and other even-numbered notes in the harmonic series can't be produced. This is why it overblows on the 12th. Another thing to know about is the clarinet is in the key of B flat. It's called B flat clarinet, your basic clarinet. It's a transposing instrument, unlike, say, flute, which is in C. So this means that, for example, when everyone else is playing the note A, who has a C non-transposing instrument, we have to play the note B 1 note higher. And this is why, as a clarinetist, further down the line, we need to know how to transpose. So a lot of music has been written for clarinet in C, including Beethoven symphonies, Verdi, and many others, too many to mention. And you can come across music for clarinet in C, but to be in tune with everyone else, if you don't own a C clarinet, which most people don't, you have to put every note up 1 tone. The other transposition as a clarinetist we eventually need to know is down a semitone, because the other clarinet that orchestral players own is a clarinet in A, which is slightly longer than the clarinet in B. And a lot of music, including Mozart's clarinet concerto K622, is designed for clarinet in A, which means that if you don't own a clarinet in A and you come across it in orchestra, you have to be able to put everything down a semitone and play it on your B flat clarinet. So let's now talk about disassembling the instrument. So we take everything apart in reverse from putting it together, unscrew the ligature, and we take out the reed, ligature off, and take off the mouthpiece. Now there are different kinds of cleaning swabs, but a simple way is to get one of these with the weight in the end. Make sure it's covered because you don't want to scratch the inside of your instrument, and probably easier to go from the bell end in one fell swoop. And always stretch it out flat and pull it slowly. It does happen that your cleaning swab gets folded up inside your instrument, which is a bit of a terrible thing. I've had it happen to a student recently. It gets wrapped around a tube that's protruding inside the instrument, and if it ever happens to you, take the instrument apart, or if it happens to a student, and do not under any circumstances, say if it's got stuck partially and you're about here, do not keep on pulling it and trying to go the direction you were going, because it will never happen. The only way out of it is to get it out the same way that you were going in. So by this stage it's probably jammed in there in some sort of form. So your only hope is to get it back out that way. By forcing it down this way, it'll only get caught more. So important to have it all stretched out in one piece. Now with the mouthpiece, it's not a good idea to pull your clarinet swab through the mouthpiece, because over time it can wear it down. So I have a special mouthpiece cleaner, but at the very most you might want to just put it in partially and then pull it back out the same way a little bit like this. Well, I hope this has provided you with a small insight into the marvellous world of clarinet. There's no doubt the clarinet is a source of inspiration for many composers over time and continues today. And of course, there's a plethora of evidence suggesting that learning clarinet's not only beneficial both physically and mentally, it has many advantages that can be transferred to other areas of learning and other areas of life in general. One of the main reasons why I play clarinet, and I've spent so many years learning it, is because I have the opportunity to blend its sound with other instruments, especially with other instruments that have that different sound and operate in a different way. By forming this blend, we can create something that's even greater than what we can do as individual instruments. So it's a marvelous opportunity, and it's also a wonderful instrument for the social part of it, being able to play with other instruments and other instrumentalists. Anyway, thank you for watching. This is Elizabeth Lim, and I hope you enjoy playing clarinet as much as I do. Bye for now.